C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Washington Journal continues.
Welcome back. We're going to continue our Battleground State series, focus on Michigan today with David Dulio, who is an Oakland University political science professor and director of the Center for Civic Engagement, also author of the book, Michigan Government, Politics, and Policy. Welcome to Washington Journal.
Well, thanks for having me.
Why is Michigan a swing state?
Well, it's incredibly competitive, right? That's really what it comes down to. And I think there has been a misunderstanding, really, of Michigan politics for many years. When we go back to 1992, we get this string of Democratic candidate presidential victories until Trump flips the state in 2016. So from 92 and through 2012, Democrats had this string of victories. But, and frankly, that is what led Michigan to be part of that vaunted blue wall that came crumbling down in 2016. And underneath that string of victories was, it was really just a veneer over a very competitive state. Michigan, if on multiple measures during that stretch of time, has all the qualities of a very purple state. So the last couple cycles, right, it has been incredibly close, and it has exhibited those characteristics of a classic swing state, right? Voting for one candidate in, or I should say one candidate of one party in one election and flip-flopping back and forth.
Now, we give so much attention to the presidential race, but you also have some pretty competitive congressional races there. Can you lay that out for us?
Absolutely. And Michigan is either very lucky or cursed with the fact that we have a fabulous mix of incredibly significant races at the congressional level. Obviously, the presidential race speaks for itself. But we've got a U.S. Senate race that is close and seems to be getting closer between Alyssa Slotkin and Mike Rogers. The seat is vacant now that Debbie Stabenow has announced her retirement. Slotkin and Rogers, both great candidates, lots of actually in common in terms of their background. But we've seen, and I'm sure the callers will want to get into this, but the differences between these candidates on important policy issues, excuse me, here in Michigan could not be starker. And, you know, we have these competitive U.S. House seats, first in the Michigan 7th, where Alyssa Slotkin currently holds that seat. She's given that up, and that is a really barn burner of a race between Tom Barrett and Curtis Hertel, two former members of the state legislature who are just duking it out right till the very end. We've got a really competitive race in the 8th Congressional District. I heard a little bit of the discussion with Rick Pluta, and he mentioned Flint and Saginaw, right? There's a Flint-based district where State Senator Kristen McDonald-Rivet is running against a newcomer, Paul Young, and that is a competitive race. Not to mention the 10th Congressional District, John James. It's a Macomb County district with a little bit of Oakland County in it, Rochester Hills, and that is a race in 2022. It's a rematch, actually. John James and a guy named Carl Merlinga, former prosecutor, former judge in Macomb County, and that was closer than everybody thought it was going to be in 2022. And it appears to still be competitive now, but you'd have to give the edge to James just because of incumbency, maybe.
I wonder, so much of the discussion this cycle has been about early voting and voter turnout. Early voting started in Detroit yesterday, but the rest of the state doesn't start until later on, the 26th. Why is that?
Well, this is just the second election cycle that Michigan is dabbling in early voting, and it's actually it's the first. My apologies. It's the constitutional amendment that was adopted in a recent ballot initiative requires that there be 9 days of early voting. But other municipalities can go beyond that if they wish. So in Detroit, they have extended that time.
On Friday, presidential candidate Kamala Harris spoke in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She was talking to supporters and attacking Trump on his record in the very important in Michigan auto industry and manufacturing jobs. Let's look at a clip of that.
And his track record for the auto industry was a disaster. He promised workers in Warren that the auto industry would, and I'm going to quote, not lose one plant during his presidency. Those were his words, not one plant. Then American automakers announced the closure of 6 auto plants when he was president, including General Motors in Warren and Stellantis in Detroit. Thousands of Michigan auto workers lost their jobs. And Donald Trump's running mate recently suggested that if they win, they would threaten the Grand River Assembly Plant in Lansing, okay? The same plant our administration protected earlier this year, saving 650 union jobs. 650 union jobs. His running mate called those table scraps. So we fought hard for those jobs, and we believe that you deserve a president who will protect them and not insult them.
David, what is union support looking like in Michigan in terms of breakdown and where that support is going?
Well, it's really a fascinating element to the campaign here in Michigan, which may be different than in any other state because of the centrality of the auto industry. You know, Michigan is well known as the auto capital. It's Detroit's the Motor City. And, you know, Trump came here in 2016 and talked to voters in places like Macomb County and as the vice president said, in places like Warren, and talk to them in a way that they had not heard before, or at least in any number of years. And really, we can go back to the 80s. And Macomb County is the home of the famous Reagan Democrats, right? These are voters who liked Ronald Reagan because he talked tough. He had these are their perceptions, not mine. Said he was going to advance American interests abroad. And it wasn't America first, but it was close. And he was going to stand up for the little guy. He was going to talk tough, say what he meant what he said. And Macomb County voted in large numbers for Ronald Reagan. And Trump comes in 2016 and really lights a fire under many of those similar voters when he came and talked about NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership as bad trade deals that he was going to extricate the United States from, and he was going to stand up for blue-collar workers. He was going to bring their jobs back and fight for manufacturing jobs in Michigan. And he's actually got some credibility on the issue, right? I mean, he said he was going to renegotiate NAFTA, and he did. The USMCA has taken the place of the North American Free Trade Agreement, and whether it's good or bad is almost irrelevant. It's, you know, that he can come here and say, I told you I was going to do this, and I did, and a lot of voters in places like Macomb County give him a lot of credit for it. So he has credibility. And I would also say, too, that in 2016, when he was first here in the primary, Trump and Bernie Sanders had a very similar message when it came to trade and manufacturing. It was fascinating to watch. So you fast forward to 2024, and Trump is trying to recreate that magic. He is trying to recreate the success that he had with union workers. And he appears to be making some serious inroads. The fact that the Teamsters did not make an endorsement is, I think, an incredibly significant move. And we've started to see some data leak out from the Teamsters and surveys that they've done of their membership, where more than half of Teamster members are planning to vote for Trump. And I would imagine that that if the UAW and you know who's been in the news lately with Sean Fain as their president, and you know, he is a tough talker himself for sure. But I would imagine that there are a lot of UAW members, even though the leadership has endorsed Trump, that they're also going to vote for. I'm sorry, the leadership endorsed Harris, not Trump. That their membership is going to vote for him.
Let's listen to some of the messaging from former President Trump. On Friday, he held a campaign rally in Detroit and was speaking specifically about crime, migrants, and Vice President Harris's record on the border.
As we rebuild our economy, we'll also restore our borders. Did you ever see anything like what's coming in through our borders? Criminals, drug dealers, prisoners, people from mental institutions. For 4 straight years, Kamala has imported an army of illegal alien gang members and migrant criminals from prisons and jails, insane asylums and mental institutions all around the world, from Venezuela to the Congo, and she's resettled them into your communities to prey upon innocent Americans. I happen to think it's the worst thing that's happened. I think it's worse than inflation. I think it's worse than a bad economy. I think it's the worst thing that happened to us. 21 million people. When I win on November 5th, the migrant invasion ends and the restoration of our country begins.
We're ready to take your calls for David Dulio. If you support the Trump-Vance ticket, that number is 202-748-8001. For the Harris-Walz ticket, 202-748-8000. If you're undecided or support another candidate, that number is 202-748-8002. And again, our special line for Michigan residents, 202-748-8003. 8003. Now, David, I want to start with a text message that we've received from Jimbo in Bakersfield, California, an independent voter who says, can Professor Dulio explain the difference between the Upper Peninsula voters and the rest of Michigan? It seems like it should vote like it's part of Wisconsin.
Well, Jimbo has asked about a fascinating element of Michigan politics that. And I'm going to start broad and maybe get back into just the UP. But Michigan has an incredible diversity when it comes to politics, when it comes to political culture. Southeast Michigan has got 3 very different areas, just in one small region. You know, you've got Wayne County, which is the home of Detroit. But even within Wayne County, you go a little bit further to the west, and it's more Republican. And you go north of Wayne County into Macomb County, which we've talked about, right, home of the Reagan Democrats and Trump Republicans these days. Just west of Macomb is Oakland County, and it is a mirror image of the shift that has taken place in Macomb County, which has gotten more Republican over the years after being a Democratic stronghold. Oakland County used to be rock-ribbed Republican territory, and it is now a Democratic county. And it is full of suburban areas, heavily white, highly educated, wealthy individuals that are now a key component to the Democratic coalition. So Southeast Michigan has got 3 very different places. If you go over to West Michigan and places like Kent County, being a Republican in those 2 areas is very, very different. Kent County is sort of old school Republican, although it's also changing demographically and politically. But you get, you know, sort of to the west coast of Michigan, very different in terms of political culture than mid-Michigan, maybe near Central Michigan University and places like that. You get in Midland, different elements are important there politically. It's more of an agricultural area, and then what we would call up north. And you know, folks in Michigan will tell you where they're from with their hand, right? Anything from your knuckles north is up north. And the northern lower peninsula, very rural, lots of agriculture, and there was a question in the earlier segment about fruit workers, and that's where those come in. The UP is its own thing, and it probably does vote quite a bit like Wisconsin in terms of interests that are driven, by geography.
A question that we received on X from MLB. How influential is the governor in Michigan? She won by 54% in her last election, but abortion was on the ballot, so that may have favored Democrats. That begs the question of her influence in this election. Is she a game changer in this election?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't think she's a game changer. Number one, maybe because I don't know what qualifies as a game changer in this particular election. Since Harris has been in the race, the polls have been awfully steady, awfully consistent with, in the last 2 weeks, maybe a move toward Trump, which is reflected in other swing states and nationally, I would say. But Governor Whitmer she's been doing some surrogate work, of course, and I'm sure that the Harris-Walz campaign has tapped into her political operation and her political structure, but she hasn't been a dominant voice here in Michigan. So I even wonder if the Harris-Walz folks think they're getting enough out of her.
Let's go to Jean in Dublin, Virginia, who's an undecided voter. Good morning, Jean.
Good morning, Dr. Dulio. How you doing? I don't know if you remember me or not, but back in 2004, 2005, I was a non-traditional student taking some courses at Oakland. Before I mention my comment,
of course,
for
Gene.
your I just
Thanks
like to
for
let
calling.
You know, I took your advice, Clemson, then Virginia Tech. Anyway, what I'm calling about is this. This is especially about Michigan. The subject here is I kind of see this election being swung more about what you might call moderate Republicans and disaffected Democrats. The kind of Democrats that tell you, I didn't leave the party left me. And I can see them actually consciously voting for gridlock government. In other words, say, hey, I don't particularly like the Harris ticket, but I really don't like Trump. And so what they'll do is they'll vote for Harris, the Democratic ticket, and then vote for everybody who's a Republican in the Congress, hoping just to bottle them up. And to put it in a football term, they're punting. They're just hoping, hey, hope for better in 2028.
What's your take on that, Dr. Dulio?
Yeah, Gene, I think that's a great point and a distinct possibility, right? I think that voters are strategic and voters are smart and they know what they want out of their government. I think that split ticket voting, which is exactly what you're describing, could be a real factor here, and especially when we think about Michigan and the presidential and those competitive congressional races that we talked about, right? That you can see a voter going in and say, I'm going to vote for Harris and I'm going to vote for Mike Rogers because they want to, or vice versa, right? I'm going to vote for Trump and I'm going to vote for Slotkin because they don't want to give either party a blank check when it comes to control of the federal government at this point. So, one interesting thing to keep an eye on is we have seen a decrease in the instances of split ticket voting. But this year, maybe there's a bounce back for that. I could absolutely see that being the case.
Kim is in Flint, Michigan. Good morning, Kim.
Hello. My question is regarding the last 3 elections, including this one that Trump has been in. What do you think the increase in support has been, especially for this election, for him in the Michigan area? And do you think anything is related to race?
Well, Kim, that's another fabulous question. We see shifts in Trump's support over from 16 to 20 to now, sort of predicting what those levels of support are going to be in 2024. And I think that there are some racial differences. and or we can draw some distinctions based along racial lines. And if we go to 2016, there were some people in Michigan, especially in places like Oakland County, which I had mentioned before is this very diverse now state or county when it comes to demographics, culture, etc. But there were some voters in 2016 in Oakland County who were willing to give Trump a chance and give him a shot, and they voted for him. And he only lost Oakland County by 50,000 votes, which sounds like a lot, but it's not. And you fast forward to 20, and he loses Oakland County by 108,000 votes, which just shows you that people, and the same thing was true in 2018 when we had a gubernatorial election, but people in Oakland County just ran away screaming from Trump and said never again. And he's not been able to get them back maybe until now. But a lot of those voters were, as I mentioned before, white, wealthy, highly educated voters. Now, if we go to Wayne County, Trump actually got more votes out of the city of Detroit in 2020 than he did in 2016. So there has been an increase in support. And I think that, all of the survey data over the last several years has seemed to indicate that Trump is gaining among African Americans. He's gaining among Hispanic Americans. And I think that the fact that Kamala Harris and her campaign are bringing out heavy hitters like Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. Lizzo was here with her yesterday. They're bringing out these folks in Detroit 2 weeks before Election Day. They have transitioned to a mobilization strategy at this point, and I think it's because they're worried about African American support, especially among African American men who are demonstrating a resistance to Kamala Harris.
Walt is in Indiana and is a Trump supporter. Good morning, Walt.
Yes, Indiana, like Michigan, has a big, heavy industrial base. I'm very much a issues-oriented voter in that I like Trump's 1.5% inflation. I liked his support of heavy industry when he was president. I like the fact that he was strong on national security and not getting us into new wars and tamp down ISIS in the Middle East in a matter of a few months. To keep the money. War is expensive, and I like to have the money kept here as much as possible. Are these issues that do you think these are issues that would resonate with Republicans and independents in Michigan?
Yeah, Walt, I think it depends on the issues. The issue space here in Michigan, and I imagine in other states as well that are competitive this time around, the issue space is incredibly clear. And Trump is focusing heavily on the economy and with inflation or I should say high prices really as a key component of that. You heard the remarks from him at the rally about immigration. That is a central focus. And Democrats are really focused on abortion. And I think that is campaigning 101, where the Republican ticket is focusing on issues where they perceive that they do have an advantage over the Democrats, and the Democratic ticket is focusing on an issue where they have an advantage over their opponents. And it really is it's about delivering messages to the electorate where you can attract support, and it's been incredibly consistent. And I don't think that it's going to shift much in the last couple of weeks.
Lee is in Massachusetts and is a Harris supporter. Good morning, Lee.
Good morning. I just want to say, in general, that Donald Trump has one subject that he's leaning on, which is the border. He has given no directions about where he would go on other issues. And I just want people to realize when you say when people are saying that he's getting more black votes. How many black men have been polled? There's millions of black men. If you only poll 300, that's not telling you anything.
Lee, is your question about the relevance of the border issue in Michigan?
Everywhere.
Well, let's talk about
Everywhere.
Michigan. Dr. Dulio, how important is immigration and border issues in the state?
Well, as I mentioned this before, I heard Rick talking about immigration here in Michigan, and he mentioned how it may seem odd that Michigan has such a focus on immigration given that it's a northern state, but we are a border state, and I think that the issue's just a little bit more salient here for a lot of folks who travel back and forth over an international border, and we see the not necessarily the politics of it, but we see the execution of border policy here in Michigan maybe more than other states, and I would also say that Trump's got to focus on it because he's got an issue that works. And the last 4 years have not been good in terms of illegal crossings and the policies that have been implemented by the Biden administration. Trump says are leading to these things that he believes are bad, and he's of course going to hammer on that. That is an issue that is salient with the public. It's one of the top 2 or 3 issues that America considers to be important right now, and it's one that is that he has an advantage where he can rail against the performance of the Harris-Walz campaign, and I should say the Biden-Harris administration, and probably make some points.
Clay is in Mater, Louisiana, and is a Trump supporter. Good morning, Clay.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I would like to have Mr. Dulio comment on my statements, which are in 2 parts. Part 1 is, yes, I am a Trump supporter. Trump is for the little guy, the middle class. Just look at his crowd, and you'll see you have the working middle class voters. I'm a senior citizen. My concerns are crime and high inflation. And part 2 is comments on Ms. Harris. It seems almost surreal that 2 months ago she wasn't really on the scene, and now the Democratic Party is trying to sell her in a PR campaign like a bag of Doritos. She has no substance, a lot of smile, a lot of fluff, and no substance. I'd like Mr. Dulio to comment. Thank you very much.
So those 2 points were Trump's support for the middle class, or being able to relate well to folks in the middle class. Our caller's concerns were crime and high inflation, and then this idea of Vice President Harris being new to the scene and the way that the Democrats have been promoting her.
Well, Clay, I think that the Trump campaign has been trying to paint the vice president as somebody who has been responsible for many of the failings that they see as part of the last 4 years. And when folks come in and say that she's new, well, Trump supporters can't have it both ways, right? I mean, she's either been part of it or she hasn't. And I'm not saying that that's where you were going with it, but I think that that's an interesting part of the dialogue that's been going on. In your point about, trying to sell her like a bag of Doritos, for sure. And that's nothing new, right? The earliest campaign strategies borrowed a lot from, especially in the modern era, borrowed a lot from advertising and marketing. And so now your first point, Trump being for the middle class and high inflation, and what was the other point there? Crime. So I think Trump is absolutely trying to be the candidate for the middle class, and here in Michigan, for those union voters, for those blue collar workers, right? That maybe are disaffected by Democratic policies that they don't see as working for them. So he was successful with that in 2016, less so in 20, and he's trying to recreate that magic. In terms of high inflation, I would say that, Trump is not talking as much about inflation as he is high prices, right? The result of inflation that's been present over the last several years, right? That's really the focus, because people still go to the grocery store. They still go to make purchases in various areas, and prices are high, and he's capitalizing on that without a doubt. High crime, he's been criticized for making crime an issue, and has been fact-checked to the point where it's argued that crime is actually down. Interestingly, the FBI, I think in the last week or so, released some revised numbers that shows crime is up, and I think he's going to try to capitalize on that in the final 2 weeks.
We've talked about a lot of the different ways that voters are kind of breaking down in Michigan, but I want to talk about age. And we've got some AARP polling about likely Michigan voters, where Harris leads Trump by 13 points among those 18 to 34, while Trump leads by 11% among those 65 and older. Why is that?
Well, I think let's start with young voters, right? I think young voters are attracted to the Harris campaign for reasons that it's pretty consistent. Young people are typically attracted to the Democratic candidate at the presidential level. That is not it's nothing new, right? I think older Americans, they're more seasoned. They've got a lot more to reflect on, and I think that they're more likely to have an economic focus on their when they're trying to decide who to vote for.
We have a question specifically about Detroit. Now, former President Trump has made some comments at a rally about Detroit, and BC Venice says Detroit is the enemy within, according to Trump. That can't help his campaign. Now then, the Harris campaign then released an ad touting Detroit's recent accomplishments and quoting Trump's criticisms of the city.
They said we were dead.
Detroit waving the white flag, the city filing for bankruptcy.
That our best days were behind us. That living here is like
living in hell.
But you know what we said? We said, F that. We rebuilt ourselves. We looked out for each other, got our hands dirty, and put in the hard work. And this guy, he don't know anything about that. We are a city of winners, of up-and-comers, of builders. The Motor City. Bigger and better. Here, we believe in freedom. We don't bow down to nobody, and we never will. And so what Donald Trump doesn't understand, or care to learn, is that when he said,
our whole country will end up being like Detroit if she's your president,
that he should be so goddamn lucky.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Can you talk, Dr. DeLeo, a bit about how Trump's comments about Detroit landed through the rest of the state and the response to it?
Sure. I think, his comments at a recent Detroit Economic Club meeting where he did say, you played the audio, right? That the whole country will end up like Detroit if Kamala Harris wins. It's a paraphrase, but that's pretty much what he said. And, as I was listening to those comments, I thought, boy, this is a big mistake. And, of course, in very Trumpian fashion, he didn't go back on his words. He doubled down on them the week after in some remarks in Chicago. But of course, he's here in recent days and says that he loves Detroit and that he's going to make it great again. He didn't use those words, but you get where I'm going. And I think that it was not well received in the city. but Detroit is, and because of the struggles that it has had over the last couple of decades, right? That Detroit is an incredibly proud city. And that pride extends beyond the borders of the city and extends into places like western Wayne County, Oakland County, Macomb County, where there's great pride in Detroit. Maybe it's because of the sports teams. Maybe it's because of the resurgence that's happened in the city. But that as I said, that pride has extended beyond, and I think even folks who aren't in Detroit took offense to that. And the vice president is here. She was wearing a shirt. I believe it was yesterday when she was here. It said Detroit versus everybody, and that is really the mantra that we've seen from folks not just in Detroit but all over Southeast Michigan. Now, is it going to be enough to change somebody's mind? I mean, maybe a few people, which actually could end up being a significant could end up having a significant impact on the outcome. But I don't think that those remarks are going to move the needle that we can tell or at least we can see in polling results.
Ruth is in Sterling Heights, Michigan. Good morning, Ruth.
Yeah, good morning. Now, I've listened to a lot of stuff he said, okay, and boy, do I disagree with it. I'm an independent person, all right, just so you understand. But in 1960, I met John F. Kennedy. We had about 2 or 3 hour discussion and stuff like that and talked politics, okay? And this Democrat of today is not the Democrat of the Kennedy time. The Democrat of Kennedy time was strictly very not just patriotic. They were for their countries. The wars from World War II and Korea had just finished up. And this patriotic thing from the Democrats of today, to me, the Democrats of today, I'm talking the politicians, are more towards the communist side than they are the Democrat side.
Now, Ruth, you mentioned that you disagreed with some of the things that David had said. What do you disagree with specifically?
Talking about white people in Oakland County. Well, I hate to tell you this, but there's people of all different backgrounds in Oakland County, okay, Macomb County and Detroit. It's all heavily mixed up. You got some of the oldest money here in the state of Michigan. You got some of the most wealthy people here in the state of Michigan. And we're no fools when it comes to politics. We know who we're voting for, and we know what they are about. And one thing for sure is when you get a person that is saying, I'm going to give all these kids in college a free education, and then blaming the other person and the other party that he's trying to steal all the money from Social Security, where do you think all that money is coming from that she's going to be giving away? Well, it's coming from the Social Security, and she is going to be the one that's stealing it. That's called embezzlement. And I don't trust that woman for nothing, because to me, she is a flat-out liar.
So, David, Ruth has raised a bunch of points there. You want to respond to some of those?
Sure. I mean, we can certainly talk about the demographics of places like Oakland and Macomb County, and she's right. And one of the reasons for the shift in political outcomes in Oakland County is that it has become much more diverse, racially, ethnically, other elements of socioeconomic status. Absolutely. But there is a concentration of, and more so than in places like Macomb County and Wayne County. The Oakland County is still heavily in certain areas, white, wealthy, and highly educated. Right, that's a fact of census data. Now, there are other, and it's really interesting. Geographically, the southeast portion of Oakland County, the southeast corner, is more democratic, it's more diverse, racially, ethnically, etc. The northern tier of Oakland County is rural and largely white, agricultural, and very Republican. And then the sort of middle swath there, the middle diagonal, really is the battleground in a place like Oakland County, where in 2022, Gretchen Whitmer carried Oakland County by 145,000 votes. Right, that is 40,000 votes more than Trump lost Oakland County by in 2020. So, I mean, on election night, watch Oakland County and see what the margins are in Oakland County, Michigan, because that could tell the story for who carries Michigan as a state.
Cheryl in Somerville, South Carolina, texted us a question. If I am a registered Republican and vote down the ticket for a Democrat, does my vote go to the Democratic electors or the Republican electors? Many people need to know that they can vote for the other party even though they are not a member of that party. And I'm guessing she's speaking specifically about Michigan there.
Well, in Michigan, we do not have party registration, so nobody knows in Michigan if you consider yourself a Republican or a Democrat. But if a Republican, somebody who considers themselves a Republican, goes in and gets their ballot and votes straight ticket, which is an option in Michigan, they can absolutely vote for the entire Democratic side of the ballot.
And in terms of the Electoral College, when someone votes, and I think any time that both presidential candidates are on your ballot, your vote is going to go to whichever one, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Daryl is in Kentucky and is an undecided voter. Good morning, Daryl.
Yes, I tip my cowboy hat to you and C-SPAN. Y'all doing a fine job. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, okay. When my job, General Electric, went to Mexico, thanks to Bill Clinton in 2000-something, that was the day that I quit flying the American flag and standing up for the national anthem. You can vote till you're blue in the face, folks. It is over. Neither one of these people are going to help us, and it's sad. And I don't know what the answer is, what we're going to do, or we're going to have to meet at Kings Mountain again. And I'm retired. I don't know what's going to happen. It's sad. That's just my comment.
So Daryl reminds me of some of the other voters that were in Michigan that were quite disappointed with both party options earlier during the primaries in particular. I remember the uncommitted votes in Michigan. Can you talk a little bit about that movement and what's happened since then?
Sure, and it is one element of, I think, a broader political environment that is different this time around in some ways, but also just could not be more important. So if we go back to February and the Democratic presidential primary, Joe Biden had some opposition, but it was basically here in Michigan, Joe Biden and uncommitted, which I'm sure your viewers who are political junkies like us know that was basically an option for Democratic primary voters to say to their delegates to the national convention, I don't want you to go there as committed to any one particular candidate in the primary. But it was really a movement by Arab American voters, Muslim American voters who wanted to oppose Joe Biden and his policy about Israel and the war in Gaza. And the pro-uncommitted movement set probably a low bar, right? They said they wanted to get 10,000 votes. Well, they got 100,000 votes for uncommitted in that presidential primary. So there's 100,000 voters back in February who said, we're protesting your Israel policy, Mr. President. And that's been a thorn in the side of Democrats since then, where the Arab American vote has largely been for Democrats in the past, and for them to potentially lose even a small number of those voters, right? If we took those 100,000, of course, most of them are going to come back home and vote for Kamala Harris. But some are going to vote for Jill Stein, right, who's really making a play for those voters. She's not only for an immediate ceasefire, but she's on her website says that she's for an end to all U.S. military aid to Israel. So some are going to vote for Stein, and some aren't going to vote at all. So, you know, that loss of votes that could potentially go to Harris, and another development in recent recent days even, the Arab American Political Action Committee declined to endorse her, and that has its home here in Michigan in Dearborn. Which is the really concentrated area of Arab Americans in Michigan. So I guess my point would be that, you know, there is likely to be a small shift away from Kamala Harris in that community. And that could have an incredibly large impact on the outcome, because Joe Biden won here in 2020 by 154,000 votes. You start to take small shifts among, say, Arab American voters away from Harris, union voters to Trump, maybe African American men who aren't as enthusiastic about Kamala Harris. You start to see these small shifts in support that, when we take them together, could have a real big impact on the outcome come election night.
Last caller for this segment is Kay in Twin Lake, Michigan. Good morning, Kay.
Hi, David.
Hi, Kay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I feel kind of bad for you that, you know, when you talk about Trump, you kind of, and all people that kind of try to talk about Trump, especially as surrogates, they have to twist themselves into a pretzel to get to where they want to get or make their point. When, if you get into the weeds of everything, the only reason he's running is because he wants to stay out of prison or jail or confined to Mar-a-Lago. I think American people are smarter than that, hopefully. If not, then we'll just see what happens, I guess, for the next 4 years. But I can't go there. I'm a moderate Democrat. I would have voted for John McCain all day, any day. But I can't cross that bridge with Trump.
All right. Any final thoughts, David, to respond to Kay or otherwise?
Yeah, real quick. I'm not a surrogate for anybody. I call them like I see them. And I've always done that and will continue to do so. I think folks that are watching Michigan politics over the next, I think it's 16 days until Election Day, it's close here. It's going to continue to be close. And I think if you watch voter turnout in Oakland County, Macomb County, Kent County, and in the city of Detroit, watch that closely as we see election results come in, and that'll probably tell you a lot about where Michigan will end up, whether it supports Trump or Harris.
Well, thank you so much for your time. David Dulio is the director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University, where he's also a political science professor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And coming up after our next break, we're going to have more of your phone calls in open forum. You can start calling in now. Those numbers are on your screen.